Welcome to the deep dive. You sent us a whole stack of source material on what's happening right now, the U.S. government shutdown of 2025, a really fraught situation. And if you're like a lot of people, you hear government shutdown, and maybe you think, okay, parks close, maybe passports get delayed, but temporary thing. But our mission today is to cut through that, really. We need to unpack why the sources we looked at are calling this particular fight a political earthquake, something genuinely different. And the core reason, the really startling insight, is this looming threat of permanent job cuts. The formal term is reduction in force, or RIF. So this isn't just about temporary furloughs, people missing paychecks for a bit. No, this is about potentially shrinking the government workforce permanently. And, well, that changes everything.
It really does, and that context is key. The shutdown itself, it officially kicked off October 1st, 2025. The deadline passed, no funding bill. That immediately triggered the furloughs, but the fight underneath.
Yeah.
It isn't just about budget numbers, it's deep policy. It's about how big government should be, and crucially, it's about workers' rights now.
Okay, let's unpack that then. If this RIF threat makes it, existential, let's zoom in on the politics. What are the core conflicts? The sources mentioned three main drivers, right? The things keeping this deadlocked. Right. The complexity really stems from packing these huge policy demands into what should be just a spending bill. So conflict number one, linking funding directly to healthcare subsidies and the Affordable Care Act. You've got Democrats basically saying any short-term funding bill, a continuing resolution, has to extend ACA subsidies. But Republicans are pushing back hard, demanding a clean bill, no policy riders, which, effectively weaponizes those subsidies because they know Democrats won't easily back down on health coverage.
That sounds like, a clever political move. But if both sides know this ties healthcare funding directly to the budget, do the sources give any hint about who sort of benefits politically from making that link so non-negotiable?
Well, the sources suggest both sides are gambling, really. Betting the public blames the other guys. But specifically linking the ACA, that puts enormous pressure on Democrats, maybe forces them to accept cuts elsewhere. Which brings us straight to conflict number two, budget cuts and priorities. Republicans want deep cuts. They're targeting things like foreign aid, various social programs. Democrats, meanwhile, are trying to hold the line, protect those safety nets, protect health coverage. Total opposite priorities.
Okay, ACA subsidies, budget cuts.
Right.
What's the third factor?
The third is just pure political leverage, the blame game. The language is really aggressive. Both parties seem genuinely convinced the other side will wear the political damage for this shutdown. And we see little examples, right? Like the source material mentioned HUD, Housing and Urban Development, actually put up a banner blaming the radical left. It's become a very public fight over who's responsible.
That HUD banner story, wow. It shows this isn't just happening up on Capitol Hill, it's playing out inside the agencies. So how does that political theater actually translate into the mechanics? Who goes home, who stays, but doesn't get paid?
Right. So when the funding lapses, agencies immediately fall back on this essential versus non-essential designation. It's mandated. Your essential workers are the ones legally required to keep working. If it's about safety of life or protection of property, think air traffic controllers, border patrol, active duty military, they're on the job.
But working without pay currently.
Exactly. Working without pay, banking on getting back pay later if and when a bill passes.
And the non-essential?
Non-essential workers are immediately furloughed, sent home. And that's a huge group. Lots of regulatory staff, research folks, administrative roles. Their work just stops. Dead halt.
The numbers, when you look at the immediate impact, they're kind of staggering. We're talking 750,000 federal workers affected every single day. And the estimated cost, something like $400 million in lost wages per day. Now, usually that gets paid back later, but still, let's slow down on the agency impact, though. Which parts of the government are getting hit hardest?
Yeah, it's definitely not spread evenly. And the health and science agencies, they're taking a massive hit. And that's where you see really severe specific consequences start to ripple out. The sources we have show some pretty shocking furlough rates.
Really?
Like 41% of staff at Health and Human Services, HHS, are out.
Okay.
64%, nearly two-thirds at the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control.
Wow.
And maybe the most alarming, 75%. Three-quarters of the staff at the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, are furloughed.
75% at NIH. That's the heart of U.S. biomedical research. Losing three-quarters of your people isn't just inconvenient. It's what does that actually stop?
Well, it means immediate stoppage of work on ongoing clinical trials. Halts review of things like drug-resistant bacteria research, vaccine development work stops. Critical grant reviews stop. This is research that can take years to get going again. You can't just flip a switch. So you're talking irreversible delays in potential medical breakthroughs, and the CDC losing two-thirds of its staff. That drastically cuts down on monitoring for epidemics, public health communications, things we rely on.
And it's not just health, right? The FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, furloughing 11,000 workers. Airlines are already warning about huge delays across the system. But let's talk about the most vulnerable piece here, the WIC nutrition program.
Yes, that's possibly the most immediate human crisis unfolding from this. WIC, the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, it gives essential food help to low-income families. The sources are indicating WIC is set to run out of operational funds in literally just days. Within days, which puts hundreds of thousands of mothers and young children at immediate risk of losing their food benefits. It's incredibly serious.
That jump from, political maneuvering to that kind of critical human cost is, yeah, it's jarring. Okay, let's pivot slightly. The ripple effect. What's this shutdown costing the wider economy? And what about national security?
Economically, the costs just keep multiplying. The airlines are warning it could hit $1 billion a week in total economic impact if this shutdown drags on.
$1 billion a week.
Yeah. And think about small businesses. Anyone relying on federal contracts, construction firms, IT support, cleaning services, you name it, payments just stop. They might have to lay people off. Some could even go under. It ripples way beyond D.C. And this kind of prolonged uncertainty, it just slows down the whole national economy. Consumer confidence takes a hit. And, there's the risk to the U.S. credit rating again. We've seen downgrades before because of this kind of political brinkmanship. It becomes a real possibility.
And security. We've got troops working without pay, which has got to affect morale. Plus, thousands of civilian staff at the Pentagon are furloughed. Doesn't that directly cut into military support, logistics, planning?
Absolutely it does. Those civilian experts are often critical for the logistics chains, for strategic analysis, for managing complex supply systems. You furlough them, you inevitably undermine military readiness and support functions. You can't just sideline that expertise without consequences.
Which brings us back around to maybe the most unprecedented piece of this whole thing. That legal fight over the reduction in force, the RIF threat, permanent layoffs. Unions are actually suing, right, against OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, and OPM, the Office of Personnel Management. What's the core legal argument they're making against these permanent cuts?
So the argument really centers on a law called the Anti-Deficiency Act. It's a fundamental law, been around ages, designed to stop federal officials spending money or promising to spend money that Congress hasn't actually approved.
Basically, don't spend money you don't have.
Exactly. You can't obligate funds that haven't been appropriated. The unions are arguing that, okay, temporary furloughs, those are allowed when funding lapses. But a permanent RIF, that's a huge long-term change to the government structure. It incurs administrative costs itself. And they argue you can't do that. You can't authorize that kind of permanent change in expense without a specific appropriation from Congress. They're essentially saying the administration is trying to use the funding gap as cover to push through a permanent policy change, shrinking the workforce that they couldn't get done through normal legislation.
So what's the administration's angle? How are they justifying even attempting this RIF during a shutdown?
Well, they haven't laid out a super clear legal case publicly, but the sources suggest they might be using a, let's say, creative interpretation of rules around winding down procedures, kind of arguing that permanently removing staff is a necessary step to manage the remaining authorized funds during the lapse.
That sounds legally ambitious.
It's definitely legally murky, which is why it's in court. And what's really worrying, tying back to that blame game and transparency, the sources note that OMB, the budget office itself, actually took its shutdown contingency plans off its public website.
Really?
Yeah, which just fuels concerns about, what exactly is their plan for executing a RIF. How would it work? Lack of transparency there is a big issue.
Okay, so high economic costs, critical services grinding to a halt, and now this major legal battle over the power of the executive branch during a shutdown. What does it all add up to? What are the possible ways forward from here, according to the analysis?
Based on the sources, there seem to be three main paths unfolding. Path one is the optimistic one, a quick resolution. Somehow they managed to cobble together a short-term compromise, a CR, continuing resolution. Maybe minor concessions on both sides, everyone claims some small victory, and the worst economic damage is avoided.
Okay, best case. What's next?
Scenario two is a prolonged shutdown. This thing drags out. Weeks, maybe even months. The economic pain just keeps mounting, the billions lost, WIC running out of money, travel chaos. Eventually, the sheer cost forces some kind of deal. But the damage done by them to institutions, to public trust, that could be significant and last a long time.
And the third path, the really disruptive one.
That's number 3, escalation and permanent layoffs. If the administration actually goes through with the RIF threat, and if the courts somehow allow it, that permanently changes the federal government. You lose decades of expertise, institutional memory evaporates, it becomes incredibly difficult to hire back specialized people later. You'd essentially be looking at a permanently smaller, less capable federal government for years, maybe decades. Less capacity to regulate, research, respond.
Looking at that big picture then, it really does sound like this has moved beyond just arguing about dollars and cents. It's become a fight over the fundamental role and size of government itself.
Exactly. That's the core takeaway from the analysis. Shutdowns, they used to be seen more as bargaining chips, leverage in fights over maybe discretionary spending levels.
Yep.
But what we're seeing in 2025 suggests they've metastasized. They're now existential fights. Budget arguments are completely tangled up with these huge policy battles, healthcare, social programs, and now even the basic rights and permanence of federal workers. It shows just how deep the polarization has become.
Okay, so just to quickly recap the absolute key takeaways for you listening. The core political fight links those crucial ACA subsidies directly to demands for deep budget cuts. This is having a massive, immediate impact, crippling vital agencies like NIH and CDC, with WIC funding about to run out. And hanging over everything is this unprecedented threat of permanent layoffs, the RIF, which is now being fought out in court under the Anti-Deficiency Act.
And maybe the biggest consequence, the one that goes beyond the money or the politics, it's the damage to transparency, the damage to just basic public trust in government institutions being able to function reliably. That instability, that uncertainty really erodes public confidence.
Yeah, and the sources we looked at suggest almost 2/3 of Americans actually oppose this shutdown. So if this conflict really is redefining how people see the federal government's stability, its basic capacity, and if permanent layoffs become a new political tool, what level of long-term damage, what cost, will finally be high enough to make one side decide it's not worth it anymore? That's the really tough question we leave you with as this continues.